Episode 13 of My Happy Ending starts with Teo showing up at Jae-won's house and learning that things had gone as per their plan. He asks Secretary Kim to call the cops and have someone follow Jae-won. At the same time, Yoon-jin learns about Jae-won's kidnapping and waits for her father to take any action as needed. A flashback from Jae-won and Teo's conversation shows how Jae-won had planned to be attacked by Mr. Kwon. He drives to the place where Jae-won is being held captive. Meanwhile, Mr. Kwon shows up and recalls how he had helped Jae-won all those years ago. He brings up Soon-young's death and Jae-won accuses him of poisoning her husband. Mr. Kwon blames Jae-won for Yoon-jin's actions and tells her how she instigated Yoon-jin to do what she did. He claims that Soon-young had come to Yoon-jin, apologizing to her and confessing to killing him. Jae-won is appalled by Mr. Kwon's actions. He tries poisoning her with the same pesticide that killed her mother. Teo shows up just in time and fights Yoon-jae. In the meantime, Mr. Kwon tries to escape. Teo and Yoon-jae fight each other and the latter is about to use his knife on Teo when the police sirens start blaring around the area. Yoon-jae flees just as the cops show up and Jae-won is taken to the hospital. In the meantime, Yoon-jin waits for Mr. Kwon to return. She calls in Mr. Kwon's lawyer and has her father sign a will wherein he hands over some of his assets, including Revie. Mr. Kwon is shocked, but Yoon-jin states that this was compensation for how he always meddled in her business and ruined her life. The next day, Tae-ju meets Detective Lee at the scene of Jae-won's kidnapping. He learns that Teo had shown up there before the cops, which Tae-ju finds odd. Jae-won wakes up in the hospital bed and apologizes to Teo for getting him concerned. Together they watch the footage from the camera in her sweater where Mr. Kwon confesses to killing Soon-young. Jae-won states that handing over the footage to the cops was not going to be of any help as Mr. Kwon was a powerful man and could easily do away with the evidence. They recognize Yoon-jae as the guy who broke into Jae-won's house recently. Just then, Detective Oh shows up at the hospital and tries to question Jae-won. Teo tells the cop that Jae-won has no memory of the incident and refuses to let her answer the cop's questions. Mr. Kwon tries to figure out who leaked the information about his embezzlement that caused the raid. Coincidentally, Tae-ju shows up at Yoon-jin's office and tells her how he finds it odd that Jae-won does not remember anything about her kidnapping. Yoon-jin asks him about Sung-kyu. Tae-ju reassures her saying the situation is under his control. That day, Teo drives Jae-won home where there is security waiting for her. Teo states that the security will be waiting outside the house to protect her. After driving away, Teo meets Mr. Kwon's secretary who hands over confidential information about Mr. Kwon's private contracts. The secretary refuses to further help Teo as Mr. Kwon is already suspicious of him. However, Yoon-jae, who was following the secretary, spots his interaction with Teo. That night, Jae-won thinks about Tae-ju's connection with the entire case as well as Detective Oh's inclination towards solving the case. The next morning, Detective Oh interrogates Teo about Jae-won's kidnapping and tries to understand how he was so prompt in finding Jae-won before the cops. She also questions his involvement with Sung-kyu's recent disappearance. Teo states that he did not trust her to reveal everything he knew about the incident as she was friends with Detective Lee and Tae-ju. Detective Oh shows up at the casino Tae-ju is gambling and asks him about his involvement in Soon-young's murder. She warns him against going as far as murdering someone for money. Meanwhile, Teo meets Jae-won at her house for dinner and tells her all about his interaction with Detective Oh. The next morning, Mr. Kwon attends an official hearing about his embezzlement scam along with other members of the Ministry of Tourism. The chairman of the ministry accuses Mr. Kwon of kidnapping Jae-won. Mr. Kwon denies the accusation, but the chairman calls Jae-won in to testify against him. At the hearing, Jae-won plays the video from the camera on her sweater. The video shocks all the ministers and government officials in the room as Mr. Kwon confesses to killing Soon-young as well as shows visuals of him trying to poison Jae-won. Mr. Kwan tries to convince the chairman that the video was fabricated, but Detective O shows up there to arrest him for Sun Young's murder. Mr. Kwan is arrested and the news spreads like wildfire. Yoon-jin watches the video of Mr. Kwan's arrest in her office while Tae-ju watches it from the casino. Detective O interrogates Mr. Kwan about his actions and states that he done it all to protect Yoon-jin. Mr. Kwan takes all the blame on himself to try and protect his daughter. Chon-suk gets worried after seeing the news and asks Jae-won to think about her health before taking any more drastic steps. That night, Jae-won and Tae-oh try to figure out who Yoon-jae is. Tae-oh concludes that he could be one of the recipients of the Yane Art Scholarship. Meanwhile, Yoon-jin waits in Mr. Kwan's cabin where Yoon-jae shows up and discusses the events that took place over the last few days. Yoon-jin tells him that she will take care of everything going forward, including Tae-ju. The next day, Yoon-jin talks to the reporters and makes a video apologizing to the public for her father's actions. She uses the incident as an opportunity to create a favorable public image of herself. Detective O calls Yoon-jin in for questioning and asks her about her involvement in Sung-kyu's accident. Yoon-jin denies having any involvement in what happened with Sung-kyu and also claims that she had nothing to do with Sun-young's death, even though she did not have an alibi. That night, Jae-won starts hallucinating and hears Suk-young again. She wonders if Yoon-jin and Yoon-jae were connected and recalls seeing the two together one day. She concludes that Yoon-jin was the person who planned everything, including Sun-young's death, and believes that Yoon-jin was with Mr. Kwan at the time of Sun-young's death. Tae-oh watches Jae-won spiral, but Jae-won can't seem to push back her hallucination of Suk-young. Jae-won tells Tae-oh how she couldn't make Suk-young disappear no matter how hard she tried. That night, Tae-ju reveals he knows Sung-kyu's whereabouts and asks Yoon-jin what she is planning on doing with him before revealing the location to her. Yoon-jin asks Tae-ju to mind his business and does not reveal her intentions. The next day, Yoon-jin brings a painting of RN to Jae-won's house as a present. The two women start talking about the night Jae-won was raped. Yoon-jin blames Jae-won for what happened to her that night. Jae-won states that Yoon-jin had been in her life for 30 years and knew all about her pain. Jae-won adds that Yoon-jin should have taken revenge on her if she thought it was her fault. Yoon-jin tells Jae-won that she made sure Jae-won was also left without a family, just like her. Jae-won counters that Yoon-jin needed help for her mental illness as well and adds that she was certain Yoon-jin was an accomplice in Sun-young's death. Yoon-jin retorts that it was Jae-won who had Mr. Kwan incarcerated for Sun-young's death and continues to talk about winning and losing in their game. Jae-won yells at Yoon-jin and asks her to stop talking about wins and losses since a person has died. Yoon-jin leaves the house and calls reporter Choi, asking him to release the news article with the information she had provided to him. Jae-won meets Chon-suk by the lake and the two talk about RN and Sun-young. Jae-won asks her stepfather if anyone has visited him over the last few days. Chon-suk avoids telling Jae-won about his conversation with Tae-ju and lies to her. Tae-oh meets Detective O and reveals that Sung-kyu has agreed to testify against Yoon-jin. At the same time, Detective Lee calls Tae-ju to tell him about Tae-oh's involvement with Detective O. Later that night, Jae-won and Tae-oh rush to the house where Sung-hee was made to stay. The police bring out a dead body from the house. The episode ends with Yoon-jin being brought out of the house with blood all over her. The episode review. The delusion that Yoon-jin lives in is beyond me. I cannot believe how she is still going on and on about Jae-won trying to steal her man when Sang-byum, the man in question, was not even worth it. It would have been understandable if Yoon-jin was acting this way over Sun-young or Tae-oh, the only two men in this show who are worth this chaos. The episode ends on a cryptic note, but I am sure that it is Sung-kyu's dead body that was being brought out. I wonder why Yoon-jin didn't flee from the house unless it is not her fault that caused Sung-kyu's death. I wonder why Yoon-jae is so inclined to protect Yoon-jin. It could be possible that the two are siblings, thus justifying his loyalty towards her.